it was in about 1144 that Jordan de Briquet, the Norman lord of Clerkenwell Manor, founded the nunnery of St Mary, a house of Augustinian canonesses, shortly after the adjacent Hospitaller Priory of St John. The home of the Priory of St John, and the site of a number of wells and spas, including Sadler's Wells and Spa Green, and of course including Clerkenwell, which the well was then rediscovered in 1924. Meant it was must have been a lovely area just outside of the city. And again, joining the priory was St Mary's Nunnery and the Benedictine Order and monasteries. So they were all in the same areas, Priory of St John and St Mary's Nunnery. And because of the religious orders there, they had mystery plays and miracle plays. They're among the earliest formally developed plays in medieval Europe. So medieval plays focused on the representation of the Bible stories, and told stories about things like the creation, Adam and Eve. So people would have come out to see those. The first documented reference to the Crown pub was in 1641, and it seems that it's always been called the Crown. The site of the tavern would have been next to the ancient gatehouse, which would have still been there in the 1700s, the gatehouse of the old nunnery, and the present house where my mum grew up in the late 1940s would have been part of that, the old great gatehouse that was part of the nunnery site. And the Crown pub in its present form was built in 1815. So Clerkenwell only really became a part of London in the 1700s, when the Penton estates were laid out as good quality housing for the growing middle class who were willing to commute into the city of London. I was just reading another very good book about the the Fields Beneath, which is about the history of Kentish Town, and very very similar there. That was in the mid 1700s. People actually started commuting from Kentish Town all the way down to the city of London. So in Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, Clerkenwell Green is where Fagin and the Artful Dodger induct Oliver into pickpocketing amongst the shoppers in the busy market that was in Clerkenwell Green. So it became quite a tough area, but the area, it became notorious for poverty and squalor, and I think all along, just at the bottom there, that you would have had the Fleet River still flowing down. But then when they built the Farringdon train station, that was built in 1863, and they cleared out a lot of the slum areas along the Fleet River for the station that was built on top of it. So they demolished a lot of the shanty towns that were along there. Clerkenwell Close became a centre for the clock and watch trades, sort of mostly in small workshops. So they'd each be doing a different aspect of the production. So a complete clock factory run by John Moore and Sons was set up in the late 1700s, and wonderfully there was a chiming clock with a 9-foot dial that was made for Lima Cathedral in Peru, and that was in 1819. So that was made Clerkenwell and then shipped off to Peru. I think that cathedral has been there since the early 1600s as well. there was no factory in the locality until about 1878, and by the early 19th century, Clerkenwell became a major centre for clock and watchmakers, as mentioned, gold and silversmiths and printers, making it a major artisan centre in London. So although there was a real benefit in having that high concentration of trades, there were some, huge drawbacks. In 1799, Parliament imposed a watch tax, allowing cheaper imports from the continent. So cheaper imports from Europe. Instantly, 8,000 people from Clerkenwell. I've read they're called Clerkwellians. It's very nice. So 8,000 people from Clerkenwell were out of work. So soup kitchens were established in Coppice Row to feed the watchmakers and their families. They no longer had any jobs. And Clerkenwell, over that period, of course, and before, was associated with radicalism, an international, sort of support for other people and workers. So, associated with the Lollards in the 16th century, the Chartists in the 19th century, and the Communists in the 20th century. So, for example, in 1865, there's a big outcry about in Jamaica, 439 Jamaican squatters were hung, and they, in Clerkenwell Green, they burnt an effigy of the governor of Jamaica. People just felt, incensed about, these sort of international, atrocities that far away from home. In the same way, there's the, big Fenian movement, the Irish Republican organisations that were all over, like in Liverpool, London. There was I think 4 Fenians were going to be given the death sentence in Birmingham, and over 10,000 people demonstrated against it in Clerkenwell. The Speaker's cart was right outside the Sessions House, and in 1871 there was a big Paris Commune meeting in the square. In the on the green. So, and also they found in 1867 they 3 Americanized Irish Fenians tried to blow a wall in the Clerkenwell House of Detention, which was on the other side of St John's Church, in the opposite direction to the Crown and my mum's place. They tried to blow up a wall to, like cowboy style, American cowboy style, to try and free some imprisoned Fenians in there. And I think there was, a lot of the, people in the neighbouring buildings were killed in the attempt. And then they also found, under the Church of St James's flooring, they found a Fenian arms cache of 400 rifles, 25 cases of revolvers, 5 barrels of ammunition, and 100,000 rounds inside the Church of St James. So, so obviously there's a lot of the Irish Fenians felt, they were very present in the area. I always found it very interesting as well. There was an Indian man called Dadabhai Naoroji, I think, he's called, and he was known as the Grand Old Man of India and the unofficial ambassador of India. And he was an Indian independence activist and businessman and scholar and writer, and he was very involved. He was one of the founding members of the Indian National Congress. He was its president lots of times, and then he moved to England and he became a Liberal Party member of Parliament. So and he actually won his seats. He represented Finsbury Central, which Clerkenwell was part of between 1892 and 1895. So that's it's fantastic. I think he was the second Indian. I think the first one was an Anglo-Indian member. So, but fascinating. And of course, Lenin, Stalin, and Karl Marx, they frequented the areas. In these areas, and the Marx Memorial Library was founded in the same site in 1933. So, fascinating area. I think after the Second World War, Clerkenwell suffered from industrial decline, and so many of the premises occupied by the engineering and printing and publishing businesses moved out. But even today, it's still a place where people will. It's one of the points for along the road when people go demonstrating. So